Well, collectivism is generally, I think the word was initially used by Ayn Rand, or that's the first usage that I'm really familiar with, but it basically means any system in which the group is elevated over the rights and importance of the individual. So anything, if fascism's collectivism, communism's collectivism, any sort of authoritarian system, they're all collectivism because they all use the pretext of the greater good for the greater number as opposed to the greater good for the individual. That is what is elevated, the greater good of the collective, and is always at the expense of the individual.
And of course, in reality, the greater good for the greater number always ultimately means the greater good for us, whoever us might be in that system, the authoritarians themselves. And it's always clothed in wonderful rhetoric. Can you talk a little bit about how education is used as a tool for conditioning the public towards collectivism?
Well, certainly. These themes were pushed by organizations, specifically in the United States system, but they found their way up to where I'm from, Canada. But let's say the General Education Board, they funded numerous initiatives which were promoting a certain worldview, an appreciation, we'll say, of the United Nations, the need for a collective view of society. Say the number two, the organizations I mentioned in my film are the National Education Association, along with the Progressive Education Association. Of course, progressive is means the progressive ideology, which the progressive education system was basically started by John Dewey. He was seen as the godfather of it, and it's basically the idea that all of these educators who were influencing the education system in the 20th century decided that there was a new age of collectivism emerging, and that society needed to move away from the individualistic tendencies of Western civilization. So they decided to use education as a way to indoctrinate these ideas into children. And as I go into in my film, the Reese Commission, really showed how that was happening and listed organizations and names. That's you can go to Charlotte Iserby's website, American Deception, and you can get all of these documents that I quoted in my film, and they're right there. A lot of what I quote in the film had a lot to do with Charlotte Iserby's work. A lady I interviewed in her book. But you can find all those documents on her website. This isn't some esoteric thing. This is I almost like it's a conspiracy, but it's an open conspiracy. It's an open agenda. It's not hard to find the backing for this information. It's the legwork's already been done by a lot of great people. All it takes is for people to just buckle down and just go find it. It's really simple.
You're exactly right about that, and in fact, The Open Conspiracy was actually the name of a book by H.G. Wells, who was very much a part of this overall agenda, so people might want to check into that, where he said, yes, this is completely open conspiracy, and we're trying to make this and bring this about. And you mentioned, of course, the General Education Board, which was one of the forerunner organizations to these education associations that are operating today, and the General Education Board, founded in 1902 by John D. Rockefeller. Surprise, surprise. So yes, it's always these same clique elite groups and families and foundations that are funding so much of this and bringing it about. And you have such choice quotes in there from people like Dewey and Skinner about this process of educating and manipulating the public consciousness in a certain direction. So let's bring that up towards today, where the documentary and the latter part of the documentary starts to talk about cultural Marxism and identity politics. How is that being used as the vehicle for the front for this collectivist ideology today?
Well, first I'll talk about what cultural Marxism actually is. Cultural Marxism is the application of the Marxist paradigm to the area of culture. So what that means is they see the proletariat as white Western men, and the bourgeoisie as white Western men, with the proletariat being women and minorities. So they apply that same oppressor and oppressed paradigm, and then they make critical observations using that paradigm as a lens. The big intellectual theory that they have, it's a kind of a catch-all theory, is called critical theory. Now, critical theory, along with the whole ideology of cultural Marxism, was started by the Frankfurt School in Germany before World War II. These folks wanted to see why some of Marx's early predictions didn't come true, and while some apparently did. The big one was why didn't the bourgeoisie, or excuse me, the proletariat rise up against the bourgeoisie when the Great War of World War I was announced and overthrow their bourgeoisie oppressors? The answer the Frankfurt School came up with was that it was due to the corrupting aspect of the capitalist free enterprise system, that Western materialism had corrupted them, and that in order to bring in their great revolution, they would have to tear down Western culture. Well, to that end, they did create critical theory, and they used that as a movement, and it's become very, very prevalent in institutions today. In universities, we'll say. If you look, there's critical race theory, critical gender theory. It's always some sort of critical theory, and that comes back to the Frankfurt School. Well, this started in the 1970s when the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation funded the first women's studies university courses and melded them with Marxist theories about exploitation. So that's where you first get the very first manifestation of cultural Marxism and how leftism became so prevalent in the institutions. So, when I say leftism, people often mistake the false left-right paradigm in the political system to what I call the real left-right paradigm, which is the silent ideological war happening now. These people who are promoting these ideologies, they're true believers, James. They believe all of this stuff. This isn't everything's not a big George Soros conspiracy. Yes, the elites fund these organizations, but the people who are executing them on the ground are 100% true believers. So you're right, what you said earlier. It's an influence. They fund they give a platform and fund the people who are espousing ideas that help them. Which gives these other people an advantage in what I call the silent ideological war.
I think you're exactly right about that, and I think, yes, rather than the phony left-right paradigm, maybe it's the up-down paradigm or something like that, where it's collectivism versus individualism or something of that nature. But let's define the opposite a little bit more so that we understand what it is that we can actually posit as a counter to this collectivist ideology. Is it simply people just walling themselves in their house and never going out and meeting anyone? Is that the opposite to collectivism?
No. Basically, when I use the word collectivism, I mean coercive collectivism by the state. Human beings, by our very nature, we all know, are social creatures. We depend on one another. That's why we have the division of labor. The alternative, of course, is self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, the idea of the individual not being beholden to the group, but being means unto themselves. Someone who I do not as a human being owe anyone else anything simply for the act of existing. I do not have any unwritten or implicit obligations to any group. That is basically the alternative. Free human beings who are free to live their life how they see fit, so long as they are not infringing on the rights and liberties of anybody else.